The audio you're about to hear was recorded in Anchor. Learn more at anchor.fm.
You're listening to Pretty Dece, the bite-sized audio blog about games, comics, movies, and more, featuring news, reviews, opinions, and impressions. So if you're a geek, we hope you think it's Pretty Dece. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Pretty Dece for April 6, 2017. I'm your host, Josh, and today on the show we started getting spoilers for my favorite game of all time, the new upcoming set of my favorite game of all time, which is Magic the Gathering. My favorite non-video game of all time, we'll say. I'm very big into Magic. If Magic isn't something that you play, I would definitely suggest giving it a shot. Maybe like buying an intro deck, a Planeswalker deck, going to your local game store and just asking about Magic. They'll usually give you a deck to try out and, take it home and play it with a friend. Like, Magic is a very simple game to learn about. It's a very simple game to pick up the basic mechanics. But it's a very deep, incredibly deep game, as you learn more about it. It has a really high skill ceiling, and there are tons and tons and tons of different ways to play Magic as well. So, we will do future episodes on all the different types of ways to play Magic, whether it be, drafting, Commander, if you want to keep up with new stuff and play Standard, if you want to build a deck and keep playing it forever and play Modern. There's lots of different things you can do. You can play it very casually, you can have a lot of fun, you can play it very competitively, you can get really heavily into the story and care more about that aspect, the characters that are running around in the world of Magic. Lots of different kind of avenues for enjoying the game of Magic, and I definitely enjoy it a lot. I got pretty heavy into Magic a little over a year ago at this point, and have been keeping up with set releases and playing in tournaments here and there, and I've even traveled for Magic tournaments at this point. So I'm having a really good time with Magic as a whole. And the newest set of Magic is coming out very soon. It's called Amonkhet. And that is essentially an Egyptian themed set. So, obviously it's not Egypt in Magic. These are all made up fantasy realms. And the whole story of Magic is that there are these different planes. And planes are essentially realities. So we have planeswalkers who travel between planes, and we are arriving at the beginning of this set on the plane of Amonkhet, which is a world filled with literal gods, filled with pyramids, set in a very Egyptian-esque world. So the spoilers are starting, meaning we are getting our first look at some of the cards in Amonkhet. So first I wanted to kind of break down some of the mechanics that are going to show up in this new set and what I think about kind of where those mechanics are headed, and then touch on a few of the cards. We will probably touch back in later as more of the cards get revealed. But first up, let's talk the mechanics. So Embalm is the first mechanic that will be the first one to show up here in Amonkhet. Embalm is an interesting mechanic. So just in very simple terms, when a creature dies, so you have a creature out on the battlefield and it dies, or it ends up in your graveyard in some way, Embalm is an ability that you can play only when the card is in the graveyard, and it creates a token, so a copy of that creature, except it's a zombie in addition to everything else that it had going on. So you are literally embalming that creature, sending it back on the battlefield as a zombified version of its former self. So you can do some really interesting things with Embalm, and it just gives you a little bit of added bonus on a creature. If a creature dies, you can bring it back for its Embalm cost, if it happens to have one. So it'll be really, really interesting to see how they balance that Embalm cost with the original cost of the card. The ones that we've seen so far, the Embalm has always been a little bit more expensive. So the first time you bring the creature out, it might be, fairly reasonably priced, and then when you want to bring it back as a zombie, you're going to pay for it. But usually the benefit there will be, will outweigh the cost that you had to have to bring it back. And also it's worth noting that it is a token. So anything that does special interactions with token-specific cards will interact with the embalmed zombie version that it didn't with the original. That brings us to our first preview card, which is Timid Vizier of Noctamoon. Yeah, these are all very Egyptian sounding names. So this is actually a legendary creature, so it can be your commander in commander games if you are familiar with that. But it at the beginning of combat, so when you're getting ready to attack, it can make a target creature token get +1/+1, so it makes a creature stronger, and also makes it so that creature cannot be blocked, so you can actually get through some of the blockers that your opponents might have. This is really cool because if you have a bunch of zombified guys who have been embalmed, well, Temet here can make them unblockable. So that could be a really cool strategy in this set. The next mechanic is called Exert. Exert is really cool because it's very simple and it does exactly what it sounds like. When a creature attacks, you can exert that creature, meaning that you are making it work extra hard. For the cost of it working extra hard, it doesn't untap during your next untap step. So when your next turn rolls around, you can't attack with this creature again, because it was exerted. It's too tired. However, the benefit you get from exerting a creature depends on the card. It'll be some extra effect. Like, for example, maybe a certain creature that your opponent controls can't block this turn. So there's lots of really interesting things they can do with the exert mechanic, and I'm really excited to kind of see that design space and how they play in it. So the really simple example is dealing damage for exert. We've seen that, making it so a creature can't block. But I'd really like to see some kind of interesting uses of exert. Maybe things that do things to your creatures or let you draw a card, all sorts of things like that. I think exert is it's a very simple mechanic to understand. I think there's a lot of room to play in it design-wise, and also it's a really fun during the game, so it's a really fun trade-off to say, do I want to get some extra benefit here at the risk of not having this creature next turn to be able to fight with? That's gonna be a really hard thing for players to figure out how to balance. Next up, one of our mechanics for Amonkhet is cycling. Cycling is an ability you pay the cost, so the card will tell you how much to pay, and then you can discard that card. So rather than play it, you can discard it, and you get to draw a card. So this is really nice because maybe the card you have in hand is not the card you need in your particular situation. Well, you can discard that card and try to go for another one that might help. So we actually have a land cycle in Amonkhet here, and the lands themselves have cycling. This is really neat because later in the game, maybe you've got all the lands you need. You don't need any extra lands to be able to cast anything. You're very happy. But if you could trade that land in for another card, maybe that would be a creature or a spell, well, that's a really, really powerful thing to be able to do. So cycling is really cool. There are a lot of cards that work with cycling in fun ways. For example, we have a card called Drake Haven that was previewed. Drake Haven is an enchantment, and when you cycle a card or discard a card, you can pay 1 and then it creates a creature. So whenever you cycle, you can be creating creatures on top of cycling. So you're not only getting the benefit of that cycle, you're also churning out creatures as it goes. So that's really cool as well. Another mechanic is -1/-1 counters. So this makes your creatures ever so slightly weaker. So normally that's not a good thing, but lots of cards have effects that work around -1/-1 counters. For example, we saw a card called Exemplar of Strength that when it comes into play, you put 3 -1/-1 counters on a creature that you control, so including itself. And then whenever it attacks, you can remove one of those counters to gain a life. So you can use those -1/-1 counters to your benefit. Lots of other cards will interact with those counters in particular ways, but that's just one specific example. So you might be placing them on your own creatures, you might be placing them on your opponent's creatures. Lots of stuff that can happen with those counters. And the final mechanic for Amonkhet is called Aftermath, and it's the most complicated. Aftermath involves cards that are split. So these are cards that the top half of them looks like a regular magic card, has a regular ability, it's an instant sorcery, whatever. And then the bottom half is a card that is rotated 90 degrees. So picture two cards on the same card, however one is facing, top to bottom and one is facing left to right. The card that is facing sideways is an Aftermath card, and this is a card that can only be played from your graveyard. So the idea would be you play the first card, it goes into your graveyard, and then you can play the second card, the Aftermath card, and it has a completely different effect. Oftentimes the ones we've seen have completely different colors, as we've seen some examples of, and do a different thing. It would have a different cost. It would be a completely different card. It just happened to be attached to this other card. I think they can do some really cool things with these Aftermath cards. It's functionally pretty similar to Flashback, which is a mechanic that they've done before. But the idea that the Aftermath card is a completely different card. It's a different, like I said, it might be different color, might be different, effect entirely, completely unrelated effect. Again, there's a lot of room to play with that, and I hope they take that in some really cool, off-the-wall directions. I hope we see some really, really weird pairings for Aftermath cards. My one big problem with Aftermath cards is their look. They are very ugly. I think a normal Magic card looks really, really cool, but when you get to these cards here, because they are sort of split bordered, two cards showing up on one card, both of them look really squished and squeezed, and neither of them have enough room for their text or their art. And I think it is just a bad looking Magic card. So that doesn't really matter for how it plays, but aesthetically speaking, I would appreciate it if the card was a little bit cooler laid out, a little bit nicer looking. I wish they would have found a better way to handle that. But that is Aftermath, as I said. So lots more cards have been spoiled thus far. We will a different day run down through some more of the cards. There's a really cool cycle of God cards, one for every color that have come out. So we've seen a couple of those so far. So when all 5 have been spoiled, we'll circle back through and kind of talk about those. But yeah, so that's Magic. Very excited about that upcoming set. And so far the set seems pretty decent. So, thanks for joining us here on Pretty Dece today. Thanks for letting me talk about Magic. Again, a game that is very, very close to my heart. I'm sure you'll hear more about Magic as the episodes and the days roll on. So thanks very much for joining us. If you like what you hear, if you want to hear Pretty Dece every single day, please favorite the show in the Anchor app. We'll show up first on your list, and you'll be able to catch every episode every single day. Also make sure that you like the show on Facebook. You can keep up with everything that's going on. You can find that at facebook.com/PrettyDeceShow. The show is also on Twitter, twitter.com/PrettyDeceShow. And finally, if you have something to say, you want to talk about a specific game, you want to talk about Magic, you want to talk about a video game, you want to talk about anything geeky under the sun, please call into the show. Click the call in button in the Anchor app and record a message. It'll be sent right to me in my app, and I'll hear it, we'll put it on the show, we'll talk about it. It'll be great. So that's going to do it for us today. I've been your host Josh, and this has been Pretty Dece.